Aslında bugün de dediğim gibi çok ilham verici, bizim için gerçekten YGA gönülleriyle hayal ortaklarına tanık olacağımız bir gün olacak. Bir yandan da bugün YGA mezunu Ege ve bizim Doktor Arun Majumdar, The Sustainability Dekanı Arun Majumdar'ı ağırlayacağız. YGA mezunu Ege, kendisi Stanford Üniversitesi'nde okuyor. Robert Koleji'ndeyken YGA ile tanıştı. Benim Ege'de en çok gördüğüm şey, bütün bu YGA'da sorumluluklarının yanı sıra hem ekibine çok güzel liderlik ediyor, hem de gerçekten ekibi nasıl geliştirebileceğine bakıyor. Kendisi şu an Harvard'da okuyor. Egeciğim, söz sende, hoş geldin.
Thank you so much, Didem, for your kind words. I'm continuing my journey with YGA here at Stanford University, and our valuable guest, Professor Arun, is the Dean of Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. He's the J. Precourt Professor of Provostial at Stanford University, a faculty member in the departments of Mechanical Engineering and Energy Science and Engineering, and a senior fellow of the Precourt Energy and Hoover Institute. He's also a faculty member in the Department of Photon Science at Stanford Linear Acceleration Center. Prior to joining Stanford, Professor Arun was Vice President of Energy at Google. He was a senior advisor to Secretary of Energy, Dr. Steven Chu, and serves as a chairman of the advisory board to current U.S. Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. Welcome, Professor Arun, and thank you for bringing all this experience with you.
Well, thank you, Ege, for inviting me and to the whole YGA group that I happened to meet in Istanbul. It's just a fantastic organization, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and also to wish you all the best for the future to the whole organization.
Thank you. We are very lucky to have you. To start off, I would like to ask you about your most recent responsibility as the Dean of Stanford's new school. In September, Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability opened thanks to a record-breaking investment of $1.7 billion. Can you tell us about your approach to how an academic institution can tackle challenges associated with climate and sustainability?
Yeah, this is probably the defining challenge of the 21st century. We at Stanford, after about 4 or 5 years of discussion and deliberation as to what should Stanford focus on for the next few decades, came to this realization. Maybe I could show a couple of slides as to why we think this is so important. If you go to the next slide, this is the, let me see if I could move the slide. This is the historic and projected population growth in the, on Earth, on the world. And as you can see, till about 100 years ago, the population was about 1 billion or so. It took about 1 million years for the population to increase to only 300 million people, which is roughly the population of the United States. And now it takes only 13 years to add 1 billion people. And if you look at this growth, it is more than just an exponential growth. It's a super exponential. And the population is projected to saturate around 11 billion people by the end of this century, with an uncertainty of 1 billion. And this is something that the Earth has never seen anything like this before. I call this the population tsunami. And if you look at now the other tsunamis, there's a human consumption tsunami that happens, which is the amount of economic growth, which is a positive thing. But if someone is, you know, this is in the form of GDP, but if someone is producing, there is obviously someone consuming. And that consumption needs to be fueled by energy. And because to produce things, you need energy. And so if you look at just the last 4 decades, I'm just pointing out with those arrows, sort of the 4 generations that span me. I was born in the 1960s. My children were born in the 1990s. my parents in the 90s, 20s, and 30s, and my grandparents at the turn of the century. In 4 generations, we have completely gone from biomass, which is the bottom red line out here, to what we now use. 80% of the energy is fossil fuel. And it's not a surprise that you get something called the CO2 tsunami, where the increase has gone up just exponentially, so super exponentially. And so this is the challenge, and you can do the same thing for water, you can do the same thing for plastics, and that is, they're all interrelated. And this is unprecedented in the history of the earth. Forget about history of the humanity. History of the earth, this is unprecedented. And when I look at this, it is related to energy, of course. Energy is related to water. What affects in water affects food and agriculture. What affects in food and agriculture affects biodiversity, ecology, public health, global health, and all of them are affected by climate change. And this is the issue of sustainability. It is going to be around. It's only going to get worse if we don't address it early enough. And that's the issue of sustainability, which we felt at Stanford is the defining issue of the 21st century. And we needed to go big and address it at scale. Now, it transcends the whole Stanford campus. We have had many schools: School of Engineering, Graduate School of Business, School of Medicine, Graduate School of Education, School of Humanities and Sciences, School of Law. And we used to have the School of Earth, which we have now taken and put that as part of the Stanford Door School of Sustainability. And this is the first school that we have launched in 75 years. And in a different approach than other schools, because it is a 21st century problem. So that's why we started, and we are essentially spanning the whole campus. And you know, I have a indigenous proverb that is written on the walls of my office, which I like to remind myself and everyone else as to why we are doing this. And it is, let me see if I can, somehow it's not going that direction. But it is, let me fast forward. This is the proverb: we do not inherit this earth from our ancestors. That's the wrong way to think about it. We borrow it from our children. And I think it's very important to realize that if we don't address this for our children and grandchildren, I think we will not be doing our job.
Thank you very much, Professor Arun, for outlining this very big problem. And you foreshadowed a change in the way we think as part of the solution and as to why such a school was needed at Stanford. And in YGA, we put great emphasis on being double-winged individuals. We believe that to decide correctly, you should always consult both your heart and your mind. As an advisor to the US government and various initiatives, I imagine you often have to make important decisions. Do you have any recipes for success in making the right decisions?
That's a great question, and I've thought about it myself, how I make my own decisions when it's really big decisions. And you know, it's very important to understand the human side of it. We are human beings, so we have emotions, which is what we call the heart. And you know, our emotions are sometimes irrational, right? And it seems irrational, but it is frankly quite natural. And so I think it's very important to make sure that your heart is aligned with something. Emotionally, you're engaged, and you want to do it regardless of whether others say anything. So that's number one. But we're also rational human beings, which is where the mind comes in. And if the emotional and the rational part are aligned, if the heart and mind are aligned, very important. Because if they are misaligned, it's very hard to, it can be unhappy. People can be unhappy if your heart and mind are not aligned. So alignment of the emotional side and the rational side is very important. But in addition, there are two more things that I find to be quite important. is that your family needs to be aligned with you, and your family needs to be behind you if you're trying to do something important and big and dedicate yourself to something. And so that's the third element. Your family needs to be behind you, because you cannot be alone in this. And the fourth element is your team. That is, if you're going into something, you need to have the team, because you alone cannot do this. You need your team with you, and your team needs you. So the alignment with the team is also very important. So the four things: heart, mind, family, and team.
What you say very like resonates with me, and also reminds me of Rumi, a philosopher and humanist that we talked about both in YGA and at Stanford in the structured liberal education program that I'm part of. In fact, I have a book from Rumi here, and his saying is, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I am changing myself." I was wondering if you agree that a personal change is the first step to making a greater difference.
I think it's very important to do that. And it's not just personal change that's important, but also personal reframing of how you think about it, which is why I use that. If you go back to the slide, I think how we look at the future and the past is very important. And that's why I use these words. We do not inherit this earth from ancestors. That's the wrong way to think about it. We are borrowing from our future. That means whatever natural resources that we're using today, we owe a debt to our children and grandchildren. And so one has to be very careful of how you borrow money. It's like if you're borrowing from a bank to pay for your car, you have to be sure that you have to pay it back with interest. So one has to think about the future as if you are living in a constrained world, and how you change yourself to think about the future is a mindset issue, which I think is very important. I think personal actions are critically important, but it's not just personal action, it's how you get personal action to collective action, very important. Let me give you the story, if you could move the slide to the next one. This is the story of a gentleman who passed away recently, and his name is Art Rosenfeld. And there's a effect called the Rosenfeld effect. Art Rosenfeld was a physicist. He was the last student of Enrico Fermi. Enrico Fermi is a very famous physicist, a Nobel laureate, and Art Rosenfeld was a physicist at UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And in the 1970s, when the oil embargo hit the world and hit United States very badly, everyone was conscious about energy at that time. So he was working late at night in Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and he wanted to go home after his work, and he wanted to turn off the lights of the building. He could not turn off the lights because there were no light switches. You're talking about the 1970s. There were no light switches. The lights were on 24/7. And then he said, okay, I'm going to do something about it. And he said, I'll dedicate myself to 2 years of my life trying to introduce energy efficiency in our operations. That 2 years turned out to be the rest of his career. From the 1970s till 2017, when he passed away, he dedicated himself, and his personal actions were of course important, but he also led to policy changes in California, which the United States then adopted. And you see the graph out here. The orange curve is the electricity per capita use in the United States, and the blue curve is that of California, and that has remained flat. And that is because, and this is why it's called the Rosenfeld effect, of all the energy efficiency measures, whether it is building energy efficiency, lighting energy efficiency, all that work all goes back to the personal actions of Art Rosenfeld. And so I think this is very important to make sure that while it is important to change your personal habits, etc., you also need to get people together. But it varies from different parts of the world. If you look at the carbon emissions today, you have on the vertical axis out here is the world population arranged by income deciles. And what you find is that 49% of the CO2 emissions are produced by 10% of the richest people. 49%. And so the question is, what should be the individual action be? What should the collective action be? And this is something you all should think about. And should the burden of this be to the poorest nations or poorest people? I don't think so, because they don't produce much CO2 emissions. And then the question comes up as to what should be the individual actions of the richest 10%, which are producing half the CO2 emissions, and what should be the collective actions. And I'll just offer a few. These are some of the personal choices to reduce your contribution to climate in the high income level. You will find transportation is a big deal. Food turns out to be very important. How you live, the electricity use, the home use, heating, very important. And how many children people have, very important. As I said, population makes a big difference, because as you add more people, you're going to consume more. And so this is hugely important. And it's, as I won't go into the details of this, but you can see the US per capita CO2 emissions is about 4 times that horizontal line, which is the world average. China is actually a bit higher, but there are many countries that are lower. And it's really the responsibility of the people out here in the high per capita to reduce. And that's in housing, in transportation, in services and food, in textiles and clothing, etc. And that's where the big challenge would be in reducing the emissions.
Thank you very much for this insightful answer. And you have addressed many different levels of this very big issue. So I want to ask you, for the relevance of our greater audience, do you think the young generation has what it takes to build a sustainable world?
Absolutely. I think every generation has the capability. It is really the awareness, number one, then the determination or the focus of people to really address this at scale. This is a transgenerational issue. So our generation also has the responsibility, not just your generation. We also have the responsibility, which is why we started the school, to really push hard. But every generation will have the responsibility because it's all about looking at borrowing it from the future, borrowing it from your children and grandchildren. And I think it really depends on the mindset of the generation. It definitely needs leadership for some people to really rally and galvanize the people's thinking along these directions. But it has to be a global effect. It cannot be just a few people out here, a few people over there. This needs to be a global movement to look for opportunities to reduce the emissions, to become more sustainable, and go back to a sustainable lifestyle that we used to have, except that we live in the more modern world. We're not going to drop our houses and our cars and all. We'll still have them. The question is, how can we still live in a modern economy and be sustainable? And this is new. I don't think anyone has figured this out yet.
Thank you very much for all your answers and your time, and demonstrating to us that this issue transcends borders, time, generations, and that we need to start from ourselves and work together to build up a solution for this.
Thank you again. It's been a pleasure.